Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual event, Growing Your Business in the US, Get Trade Show Ready, brought to you by Export Development Canada. We are very happy to welcome you to this event. So we will begin this event by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples, who have made both great contribution in shaping and strengthening their communities, as well as our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. Next slide. So I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping items for today's event. So this event is being recorded and we'll share the link and the presentation after the event. So no need to take notes. You will have plenty of resources in the presentation for more references and additional information. Your mic and videos will be off during the presentation. However, you can ask your questions via the Q&A function in MNS Teams. Cette présentation sera délivrée en anglais. Cependant, si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas à nous les soumettre. Il nous fera plaisir d'y répondre. So to quickly go over today's agenda, we will start off by introducing ourselves, your speakers for today's event. Our topics today will be talking about things to consider when going to a US trade show. So this will include customs requirements, personnel considerations, sales tax nexus considerations, and much more. So we'll have brief Q&A periods after each topic, but as well as one final Q&A period at the end of the session. So we really look forward to an engaging discussion with you guys. So next slide. To start off with the presentation, my name is Amandine Gakima. I'm an advisor within the International Business Advisory team here at EDC. I've been with the team for a little bit more than 5 years now, and during this time, I've had the opportunity to work with companies such as yourselves looking to enter and expand into new markets. Most recently, I have been providing support on regulatory market access requirements, such as the ones that we will be covering today. So I look forward to a great event with you all. Tanita?
Thanks, Amandine. So I'm Tanita Alexandridis. I'm Amandine's teammate on the International Business Advisory team. I've been part of this team for about 8 years now and at EDC for going on 12 years. So with between Amandine and I, we've helped hundreds of companies with questions related to all sorts of markets, different aspects of doing business internationally. Next slide, please. So just a quick moment to introduce EDC for those of you who may not be familiar. Export Development Canada is Canada's export credit agency. And for over 80 years, we've helped Canadian companies navigate, manage, and take on risk, enabling them to grow and succeed in global markets. Now, the main ways that we do that is actually through our financial solutions. That would be things like credit insurance, working capital solutions such as loan guarantees, and we encourage you to explore those in more detail as your business grows internationally. For today, though, we're focusing on the non-financial side, which is regulatory compliance. And so that brings us to the next slide about the International Business Advisory team. So the IBA team here at EDC offers a bit of a niche service. It's available to companies that are already working with a relationship manager at EDC. And for those companies, we provide a tailored research service that can span kind of one of two main areas. It's either on the markets and strategy side, where we might be helping with targeted market or industry research, tips on finding customers, how to identify a potential distributor in your target market. Or on the other hand, we also have regulations and compliance, which is where Amandine and I both work. And that's mainly focused on customs, taxes, visa considerations, setting up internationally, and the like. Now, if you're not yet working with an EDC relationship manager, there are still plenty of resources available to you. We can go to the next slide. You would have created probably a MyEDC account to access the event this morning, and we highly encourage you to take the time to explore everything that your MyEDC account has to offer. There are so many great tools, so much great information available, and this is just kind of this slide just gives you that sampling of lots of different ways to get help. And actually in that first box on the slide, I really wanted to direct your attention to our Export Help Hub, because we have almost 1,000 questions and answers there that you can search through, and you can even submit a question to one of our colleagues that can help you find an answer. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So as Amandine said, today we'll be covering the customs, personnel, and sales tax considerations for when you're traveling internationally. And from a customs perspective, we've kind of split that into two things. It's the physical goods that you're bringing, so it's your booth, as well as any samples and materials that you might be bringing along. Like I said, on the personnel side, this is about staff that might be crossing the border to enter the States. And then sales tax nexus is a term that might not be too familiar to everybody on the call today, so we'll be introducing you to that concept as well. Now, when it comes to understanding requirements for going to a US trade show, there are three main buckets that you need to consider. One of them is, what are the US federal and state requirements based on the state that the event is taking place? The second is, what are the provisions under the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, the CUSMA Agreement, that might make things easier for you? And the third one, not to be overlooked, is actually the rules and regulations of the trade show in particular. So each trade show organizer often makes available to exhibitors a booklet or some sort of guide explaining all of the rules and regulations, and that'll be something very important for you to read carefully and to ensure that you comply with in order for the show experience to go smoothly. Now, before we get into the content, I just wanted to ask everyone to please keep in mind that this event is for informational purposes only. It doesn't replace the advice of a legal, tax, or customs professional. We're not in a position to provide you with that type of advice today. That being said, of course, we're happy to answer any questions that you might be submitting through the Q&A function. But just keep in mind that if it's very, very specific to your situation, we might be directing you to speak with an expert for more support. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tanita. So let's start with the customs requirements. Next slide. So we wanted to start this section by showing you a nice picture of a few colleagues of ours who went to a trade show in Montreal earlier this year. So as you can see, they had a lot of materials with them. They had a booth, they had some promotional material, they had cameras, what you don't see, some cleaning supplies as well. So what should you be thinking of when it comes to clearing customs? So here you really should think of a classification of your goods for how you clear customs. You should be thinking about, when you're planning to attend a trade show, what goods could be classified as consumables, so goods that will be used or given away at the trade show, or what goods can be returned to Canada. The goods that can be imported on a temporary basis, don't return home to Canada, would be such as the trade show booth or the equipment. But then you have those that will be consumed or used or given away, such as the promotional material or the cleaning supplies. If we go to the next slide, we're going to look more closely at these two classifications. So consumables or materials that will be left behind. These again will be products that you would use, consume, give away while you are in the US. So this type of goods usually would enter the US through like the regular custom clearing process. And if you were looking for ways to make your life easier, potentially to reduce the complications when clearing these goods at customs, it would be to not travel with consumables that can be easily purchased or obtained in the US. However, there is another mechanism that you can take advantage of, which is the de minimis rule here. When a product is worth less than 800 US dollars, those products will generally do not require payment of any duty and potentially any sales tax. So also keep that in mind. If we go to the next slide, what are the materials that can be imported temporarily, meaning that can be brought back to Canada? This will be generally your heavy equipment. So your trade show booth, your professional equipment. In the nice photo at the beginning of the section, we had a camera showing. Potentially you want to bring that back. The commercial samples that are not meant to be distributed or any demo products that is just intended to be displayed. So for those ones, there are more options when it comes to how you can clear customs for these goods. There are for depending on your particular situation, but also depending on the type of good that it is. So usually the regular entryway is still an option where you'll be paying the customs duties, but there are also other mechanisms that you can leverage, such as the duty-free consumption entries for samples with no commercial value, or using instruments such as the temporary importation under bond, the TIB, or the ATA carnet, which Tanita will expand on in the next slide.
Thanks, Amandine. So as Amandine mentioned, regular entry is always an option for goods that you're going to be re-importing back to Canada. So essentially you wouldn't have any special declaration to make when you're at the border to say that these are only entering temporarily. That being said, at the point of entry, you would be having the goods assessed for any applicable customs duties. And those duties would depend on the classification of the product, what type of product it is, the country of origin from a customs perspective, as well as the dollar value of the goods. Now, there's a couple things to consider when it comes to regular entry. As Amandine mentioned, if goods are valued at under 800 USD, they can enter duty-free. So if you're really bringing low value goods, you don't need to worry about any special mechanism, just go for the regular entry. Also, certain goods, regardless of where they come from, can actually enter duty-free in the US. So it's important to see what the duty rate would be that would apply to your product. And we have some tools included in the bibliography that you'll receive after this presentation that can help you look up relevant duty rates. That being said, if let's say a duty rate applies for products coming from any country, there may be a reduced rate under the CUSMA agreement, the trade agreement that we mentioned earlier, Canada, US, Mexico agreement. And that could be great to take advantage of in order to enter the goods duty-free into the States. That being said, the fact that they're being shipped from Canada doesn't necessarily mean that they are considered of Canadian origin. So for that, you would want to work with a customs broker to be sure that the goods meet the rules of origin in order to obtain that duty-free treatment under CUSMA. If all of those options to get it in duty-free don't apply, there is even still an option under regular entry that could be worth exploring, which is that you enter the goods into the States, you pay the duties, and then when you come back, you re-export them from the US, you can actually apply with US Customs Border Protection for a duty drawback. A duty drawback is basically a refund of the goods because they acknowledge that those goods didn't end up staying in the US, they left the country. But that being said, the duty drawback does take time for you to receive that money back. And that's where the other three options can be interesting to explore, especially in a scenario where you're looking at potentially goods that would be subject to a high rate of duty otherwise. So we can move to the next slide. The second option that we wanted to cover then is called duty-free consumption entries. This is actually a very particular tariff classification allowed by the United States. And it's there's a special tariff code that you can indicate in your customs documentation for samples that are valued at not over $1 each, or that are otherwise marked, torn, perforated, or somehow treated so that it's clear that they're not suitable for sale or for use other than as a sample. If your samples meet those criteria, you can use the tariff code and no customs duties will apply. And it's just important to highlight that that's regardless of the origin. They could be coming from any country, and you would be eligible for that duty-free consumption entry. Now we can move on to option 3. That's temporary importation under bond. So now we're starting to think about if you're bringing your booth or professional equipment, maybe a demo unit, larger things that might be subject to higher duty rates. When it comes to temporary importation under bond, you're basically promising to U.S. Customs and Border Protection that you're bringing this in temporarily. There's a special form to fill out, and you're promising that you're going to re-export the product within 3 years. In order to qualify for that temporary importation bond, you'll have to post a bond in the amount of 110% of the estimated duties and fees. 110% is typically what applies for things that you'd be bringing to a trade show like booths, samples, etc. That being said, there are certain other items that can come in under a TIB, but where the bond has to be 200%. So it'd be important to keep in mind what amount you're looking at. And it's essentially like a deposit. You give that money to US CBP in the form of a bond, and then they would refund it to you once the goods have been re-exported from the United States. That being said, you want to be absolutely sure that those goods are entering to be re-exported. If there's any chance that you're going to keep them in the States, that you might sell them or whatever the case may be, then you don't want to use a temporary importation bond, because if you breach the bond, you'll have to pay twice the normal duty. So if there's a chance they're not coming back with you, just go the regular entry method, and that way you only have to pay once the normal duty. And then the fourth option, which is interesting, is the ATA carnet. So we'll move to the next slide for that one. Thank you. Now, the ATA carnet is an internationally recognized customs document. It's actually recognized by 80 countries worldwide. And it's a very interesting option if you're going to multiple trade shows, and especially if you're going to multiple markets. It's almost like a passport for your goods, because it permits duty-free and tax-free importation of goods during a 1-year period. The ATA carnet is issued by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and there's a flat fee, and it depends. It can be anywhere from, let's say, about $150 to about $600, depending on the value of the goods, the number of markets you're planning on going to, etc. So, like I said, this is a great option if you've got multiple trade shows in multiple markets that you're considering. And we can move to the next slide. Now, in terms of where to go next from a customs perspective, we recognize there's a lot of information that we went through at a fairly high level just now, but there's lots of resources in the bibliography. Please feel free to check them out, read them. They're very comprehensive, and they'll help you understand how it works to bring goods across the border, whether it's for a trade show or just generally. And then the second step would be to work with a customs broker. So a customs broker would be able to help you understand what are the duties that would apply to your goods under a regular entry scenario. And then at that moment, would it be advantageous to work with one of the other options, such as getting a temporary import bond or a carnet, in order to save on potential duties? And we've provided here a few resources that you can use to find a customs broker. One of them is actually our own InList tool, which is great. It's a listing of freight forwarders, but you can actually filter it to find freight forwarders that specifically offer customs services, as well as temporary export related services. The Canadian Society of Customs Brokers also has its own search directory for you to search through their members. And in the event that you're looking for a customs broker based at a specific point of entry in the US, you can also see the US CBP's listing that we've included in this slide as well. So we can take a pause now, about 5 minutes, for questions and answers, should anybody have some.
We do have a few questions. We have one. The first one is, what would be the simplest option to cover everything I'm bringing? It's a very good question. And again, it may depend on your particular situation. And are you attending a single trade show? Are you attending multiple trade shows? Are you more comfortable with completing the regular route, the regular entryway of paying the duties? Then the regular way would be maybe possibly the simplest one. Do you have multiple trade shows that you are considering attending? Then maybe the ATA carnet, maybe an additional admin check that you have to do, but would be simplest in the long run. So it really depends on your situation. And looking at for each instrument or each entry route, which will be most beneficial to you. So there is no one quick answer. It really depends on your particular situation. We have an interesting one. Are there other requirements to consider if, for instance, I'm bringing edible samples? What do you think, Tanita?
Sure, I can take that one, Amandine. When it comes to edible samples, because these will be eaten while you're in the US, that means that they're not materials you're importing temporarily. So from a customs perspective, you'll have to go the regular customs entry route. That being said, if what you happen to be bringing as a sample is small alcoholic beverage samples, that's actually one of the product categories that's permitted under the second option that we discussed earlier of the duty-free consumption entries. So that can be something to explore if that's the type of product you're considering. But that's on the customs side. It's also really important to consider that food being imported into the United States is regulated by the US FDA, Food and Drug Administration, which does require prior notice of imported foods. And as far as we're aware, there is no exception for samples entering into the States because people will still be consuming them even if it's on a small scale. So you'll want to make sure to work with your customs broker to understand what are the steps that you need to follow if you haven't worked with the US FDA before, so that your goods can enter in good order. You're on mute, Amandine.
Sorry, thank you. I say we have the best segue question because they're asking about personal considerations. So we're gonna maybe go to the next slide, start on that section, and the person in the audience that asked the question about personnel, if you have any additional questions, then you can share them with us as well. But it was the best timing. So next slide. So you are ready to go to a trade show. You're thinking about what are the visa requirements for your employees or for your representative going to the US. The thing to keep in mind is that as a general rule, any non-US citizen planning on traveling to the US for business must have a visitor visa. In Canada, Tanita mentioned earlier that there is a free trade agreement that we signed that was signed between Canada, the US, and Mexico, CUSMA. And this FTA includes preferential access provisions, so rulings that allow or facilitate trade between the partner countries and facilitate the business travels. So under this free trade agreement, Canadian citizens can obtain a B1 business visitor visa when going to a trade show, for instance, in the US. This type of visa can be obtained at the time of entry when you're about to cross the border, and it's available at no cost. However, for this, you do have to provide a few supporting documentation, and that can include the proof of Canadian citizenship, usually your Canadian passport, a letter outlining the purpose of your business trip, and the statement that the primary source of remuneration is outside of the US. Basically, you have to prove that you are employed in Canada, you're not going to go for work in the US. So if we go to the next slide, this type of visa classification, the B1 visa classification, is granted mainly to provide marketing activities on behalf of a foreign here with Canadian company for like the promotion of goods for subsequent orders. It is not meant or intended for visitors to provide services or products directly or to accept any payment. So your representative can promote your product, can take orders, but they cannot sell or receive any payment on your goods as part of this type of visa. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to see they're going to be covered by Tanita.
Thanks, Amandine. So in addition to the limitations and the allowances under the B1 visitor visa classification, another very important thing to keep in mind is what does your trade show allow? So it might sound a bit restrictive to say, oh, you can only promote and take orders, but you can't actually sell products and services on the spot. But your trade show may very well have that exact same limitation. And that might be part of the rules and regulations of the show. The other thing that you're going to want to consider is what kind of services or manpower, women power might you need during the time of the trade show? Are you going to need help with loading, unloading products, setup of your booth, tear down of your booth? Let's say something breaks on your booth, who's going to fix it? If there's anything, like certain things might be provided by the trade show, they might do the loading and unloading for you, for example. But when it comes to booth setup and teardown, one example that we've seen is if there's anything that's going to be done not by your full-time staff, then it must be done by somebody covered in the union in that state, a member of the union, from a construction perspective. So read those requirements carefully. If you're not sure, ask your trade show organizer for more information. The other bucket to consider is service providers. Let's say you want cleaning services, catering services. Many times trade show organizers will actually provide you a list of show approved providers. And that might be a recommendation, or it actually might be a requirement. They may say that those are the only ones that you're permitted to use during the course of the show. So we can move to the next slide. In terms of where to go next, we encourage you to visit the bibliography for more resources. And like I said, review the trade show rules and regulations, speak with the event organizer if you have questions. And then if you're starting to have questions, if you have, let's say, what we just covered is specific to Canadian citizens. If you're not a Canadian citizen, then you might want to speak with the local US consulate, or if it's a more complex case, you might even want to work with an immigration lawyer just to make sure that everything's clear and that there's no issues either coming into the States or coming back to Canada in the case where your employee might not be a Canadian citizen. So I think at this point we can pause for any questions.
Yes, we do have one. Après cette présentation, où pouvons-nous trouver des ressources supplémentaires pour nous aider dans notre préparation? Y a-t-il des programmes ou subventions disponibles pour les entreprises canadiennes participant à des salons professionnels aux États-Unis? 3-in-1. Comment pouvons-nous entrer en contact avec un conseiller de décès pour des questions spécifiques? I can take part of it. Je vais répondre en français et puis ma collègue pourra donner des informations peut-être supplémentaires en anglais. Alors, ce qu'on a mentionné au début, c'est que à chaque fois, sous chaque section, vous allez voir qu'on met aller voir la bibliographie pour plus de ressources. Donc, lorsque vous allez recevoir la présentation, vous aurez comme une annexe avec toutes les ressources qu'on a consultées pour essayer de mettre ensemble cette présentation. Donc, vous aurez des ressources additionnelles que vous pourrez consulter. Donc, ça, c'est pour la première question. Pour ce qui est des programmes et des subventions disponibles, oui, il y a des programmes et des programmes de soutien financier qui sont disponibles aux entreprises canadiennes qui veulent participer à des salons commerciaux. Le premier programme qui me vient en tête, c'est le programme CanExport, qui est offert par le service délégué commerciaux du Canada, qui est un programme très utilisé par les entreprises canadiennes qui veulent participer à des salons commerciaux ou à toute autre activité de promotion, de développement des affaires. Et c'est le genre d'information que vous pourriez auxquels vous pourriez avoir accès. Ma collègue Tanita tout à l'heure a parlé de toute la suite d'outils et d'informations qui sont disponibles à partir de votre profil Mon EDC sur notre site web. Donc, il y a de l'information sur, par exemple, sur le programme Can Export. Il y a aussi, vous pouvez aussi, si vous avez une question concrète, vous pourrez aussi poser votre question à partir de ce site, de votre profil, et une personne pourra vous répondre. Ou si vous travaillez déjà avec un directeur relationnel à EDC, vous pourrez leur envoyer vos questions directement et ils pourront les transférer aux bonnes personnes qui pourront répondre à ces questions-là. Tanita, if you have any additional insight?
Sure. Why don't I take a moment just to provide an English response, because these were great questions. I want to make sure that the whole audience has access to the questions and the answers. So the first question was, after this presentation, where can we find additional resources to help us prepare? Like Amandine said, we have a great bibliography here with the links, like it's all of the resources that we've used in order to compile this presentation, and highly recommend that you read through them. As well as, working with professionals that can assist, whether it's a customs broker, talking to the U.S. consulate, as the case may be. The second question was whether there are any grants or programs that can assist with the cost of attending international trade shows, and indeed there are. The most popular one that we speak about with companies is called the Can Export program. That being said, it's a very popular program. I don't believe they're accepting applications right now. It's the type of thing where it opens for a period and then it closes again once there's a lot of applications being submitted. So I would recommend checking their website fairly often just to make sure that you can catch them when they have the availability. And in terms of the third question, how can we speak with an EDC advisor for more specific questions? Like Amandine said, and like I mentioned earlier, within your My EDC account, there's a lot of information where we have our Export Help Hub where you can kind of type in a question. You might actually find the answer right then and there. But there's also an option to submit a question to an advisor, and our team members will be able to get back to you with a response. Or if you're already working with a relationship manager here at EDC, feel free to submit your questions to them and they can direct them appropriately.
Awesome. Do we have time for an additional question?
I think we could take one more, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So what if my employee traveling from Canada to the US is a US citizen? I can take that one. So it's from a visa standpoint, obviously they don't need a visa to go to the US. However, you may still need to provide proof that you are gainfully employed in Canada, that they will not be seeking employment in the US, and that the purpose of their visit will be for promotional activities only. Because you do not want for them to be liable for income tax, for instance. So from the pure visa standpoint, they may not require any visa, but however, they may still be bound by the restriction of what a business visitor may be going to do in the US, if that makes sense. Yeah, so maybe let's move on to the next section. So next slide.
Well, that was a great segue, Amandine, into the sales tax section.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Awesome. So sales tax, next slide. So I don't know how many of you have heard of Nexus. Maybe you've heard of it, and you're wondering if you are liable for it, if you need to charge, or if it has any link to sales taxes, because there's a different Nexus program when it comes to frequent travelers to the US, but there's also a Nexus concept when it comes to sales taxes in the US. So in the US, sales tax requirements are based on this concept of nexus, which comes from the Latin word link, and is used in this context to refer to significant business presence. And this is applied at the state level, and each state has different rules in order to determine what level of business presence of an out-of-state company has to go over for them to qualify for sales tax nexus. Companies with sales tax nexus in a state are required to register for sales tax and to collect and remit said sales taxes for any sales that they've made within that year. So the moment you reach the threshold, you will be liable for all the sales that you've made in that state for that year. If we go to the next slide, we look at the different types of nexuses. There are two different types. There's a physical nexus and an economic nexus. So physical nexus is linked to a company's physical presence in a given state. And although each state has their own definition of what constitutes the physical nexus, in general, it can be linked to a place of business. So if you've opened an office, it can be linked to the presence of an employee. So for those going to a trade show, but the presence over a certain period of time, or to holding inventory in that state. So if you have rented a warehouse and have some inventory in a given state, that can give you physical nexus. Thus, you would have to charge and remit sales taxes. Economic nexus, on the other hand, is linked to the dollar value of sales and given a certain threshold or number of transactions. Again, these thresholds will be different from one state to the other. However, in general, it's usually around $100,000 in terms of sales or 200 transactions per year. Once you go over those thresholds, in most we will see the various thresholds for state, but generally these are the thresholds that are applicable. One thing that we also wanted to note is that there are different definitions of what types of transactions are included or excluded per state. So you have to be careful to read at what may qualify you to have either the physical or the economic nexus. So if you go to the next slide, here we took these maps. So there is this tax advisory firm called Avalara that provides a lot of insight on tax compliance in the US, but also other countries. And this is one of the resources that you can go to through when you are preparing for your, expansion in the US before you talk or you pay like a service provider. They have a lot of information, and these resources will be really referenced in the bibliography that we talked about earlier. So as you can see, depending on the state, most of them will have both physical and economic nexus. However, the threshold will be a bit different. And you can go back to these maps. When you do go to the links that we'll be providing, then you can click on each state and see the definition for physical and for economic and what transactions will apply. So it's a resource that we do recommend companies to leverage in their preparation. So next slide with Anita.
Yes, thanks, Amandine. So as Amandine just mentioned, one of the things that can give you physical nexus, which would trigger sales tax obligations in a given state, could actually include attending a trade show. And this varies from one state to another, but some of the kind of themes that are possible determinants are, let's say there might be a threshold on how many sales you've made or orders you've taken at a show. Or the dollar value of those orders. It could include time thresholds, such as the number of days that you're in that state or the number of shows that you're attending. And the third point about monetary thresholds I kind of just mentioned is what is the actual dollar value of income that you've derived from a specific show. And so let's say a state might have a threshold on one or two or even all three of those kind of variables. And if you meet the thresholds, then at that point, that might trigger sales tax obligations. And what type of sales tax obligations can even differ actually from one state to another, because, for example, in some cases, maybe the only obligation is that you have to collect and remit sales tax only on the orders that you've taken or the sales that you've made at that particular trade show. And in that case, you can actually work with your the trade show organizer, because they may be able to help you facilitate getting a sales tax, a temporary permit, or at least just help you understand that information, because it would be a question that lots of companies would be asking them, because this is, keep in mind, this is for out of state. That means that if your show is in Illinois, whether you're coming from Canada or from Florida or from California, like all of those companies are going to be figuring out the same thing in terms of whether their attendance at that show is going to give them nexus. And then maybe for companies, sorry, for states, I should say, that have stricter rules, if you were to trigger physical nexus at a trade show, it might actually mean that you have to collect and remit sales tax on all sales that you're making in that state, whether they're through Amazon, whether they're at your trade show, or any other format. So just to show you how much this can vary from one state to another, in the next slide, we have examples from 2 states. So we kept it sunny with California and Florida. And I'll show you, I'll just walk you through the thresholds from a physical nexus perspective, like specifically looking at trade show participation, as well as the economic nexus thresholds. So in the case of trade shows, both Florida and California say that companies might be liable for sales tax on orders they've taken or sales they've made, during conventions or trade shows. They each have exceptions, but the exceptions are quite different from one another. So this is interesting. In the case of California, you can be exempted from this sales tax obligation if trade show attendance is the sole purpose of your travel. You're not going to be in California for more than 15 days in any 12-month period, and you're not deriving more than 100,000 US dollars of income based on, let's say, the previous year, if you attended the same show or any trade show in California. In Florida, the exception is different. It's if the written agreement between the sponsor and the exhibitor explicitly prohibits sales at the show, so you can only take orders, or if it limits any sales made to only be sales made for resale, then you're not required. You don't have any sales tax obligations. So as we mentioned previously, it's really different from one state to another. And so you'll have to look into each state's requirements. And as Amandine mentioned, in our bibliography, we have the link to an excellent guide by Avalera. There's one on physical nexus, one on economic nexus, where they really give a great summary for each state. And then from an economic nexus perspective, economic nexus, as Amandine said, is about how many sales you're making overall. So it's not directly linked to trade show participation necessarily, but we wanted to highlight it anyway because it's important for you to consider as you grow in the States. And if you hit the economic nexus threshold, that's actually great news. It means you're growing. It means you're generating sales in the States. You just don't want to get caught off guard with, let's say, a sales tax liability that you had never heard of. So we're equipping you here, we hope, with the right questions and things to look into so that you can go into the market prepared. So California and Florida are quite different in terms of their economic nexus thresholds. In California, their threshold is quite high. It's 500,000 US dollars in sales in a given year. But their definition of what's included is a little bit broader than in Florida. So it's total combined sales of physical goods, but it excludes services. It's also interesting to note that in the States overall, sales tax is applied more sparingly than it is in Canada. The GST, HST, it applies to almost everything in Canada. Other than exempt goods like, basic foodstuffs, medical products, and that type of thing. Whereas in the States, there are some states that, let's say, no services at all have sales tax applied to them. So there's a number of things to look into. It's what kind of sales tax actually applies to the goods or services that you're selling, and then also what kind of nexus thresholds do you need to consider for that state. So that's the California example for economic nexus. And when we move on to Florida, the threshold is lower. It's $100,000 in sales, but it only includes taxable sales of physical goods, which then excludes services, exempt sales. Exempt is like medical products, basic foodstuffs, those types of things. And then sales made through a registered marketplace facilitator, which oftentimes refers to places like Amazon. And so what's interesting is that those inclusions and exclusions, it's not only that each state will have different things that they include and exclude, but you're also going to want to understand what are the definitions of those things. What is a registered marketplace facilitator? Is that Amazon and eBay, and is the one that you're working with on their list of what's a registered marketplace facilitator? What's considered exempt? There are some, I think, that have sales made for resale as one of their exclusions. So what does that mean? How do you prove that it's a sale made for resale? So there's lots of things to consider. But like I mentioned, we're not trying to scare you here. We're just trying to equip you with the information so that you can have the right advisors at the table to help you plan proactively for your growth in the US. So I think that brings us to the next slide. And it is actually the final slide of our presentation today in terms of where to go next. Like we mentioned, the bibliography is going to be a great starting point for more resources. And your trade show organizer might be able to help. Like I said, anyone coming from out of state is going to be thinking about these sales tax questions. So it's not going to be foreign to them. If you were to approach them with a question about sales tax obligations, they may be able to help you understand whether a temporary permit is required or not. And of course, for specific and definitive support, you're going to want to work with an accounting firm, a tax expert that has US expertise, who can help you understand how state tax laws apply to your situation. So we'll open it up to any questions. We have a good amount of time now for questions, so feel free to keep them coming.
We have a few. Okay. So first one in French. Si nous avons déjà un compte Nexus au nom d'un de nos associés, pouvons-nous utiliser ce compte pour l'ensemble des ventes de la société? Alors, gardez en mémoire les premiers principes. D'abord, les taxes de vente aux États-Unis sont ce sont des taxes, pardon, qui sont redevables au niveau des États. Donc, si vous avez un Nexus en Californie, par exemple, et que vous avez un Nexus en Floride, vous aurez besoin de vous enregistrer en Californie et en Floride. Donc, ça dépend de est-ce que vous voulez, est-ce que c'est des ventes que vous faites dans un seul État. À partir du moment où vous allez dans un État différent, à ce moment-là, ça sera des exigences qui seront différentes. Il faudra vous enregistrer et avoir un nouveau compte Nexus pour cet État-là. Sinon, si vous avez déjà un compte Nexus, c'est-à-dire que vous êtes déjà enregistré pour les taxes de vente dans un État en particulier, vous pouvez continuer à utiliser ce compte-là. Encore une fois, ce que nous vous partageons aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment pour information, pour première information. Notre recommandation, c'est vraiment de confirmer tout ce qui touche à votre situation particulière auprès d'un expert. Et dans ce cas-ci, ça serait d'un conseiller fiscal. Tanita, if you have any additional insight on that?
Sure,
Or
maybe
translation
just
for English, yeah.
Yes. So the question was, if I already have a Nexus in one state, then does that work for a second state that I'm going to? And the answer is unfortunately no, in the sense that sales tax in the US is applied at the state level. And so if you already have sales tax Nexus in California and you're already registered there, and then you trigger sales tax nexus in Florida, you're going to have to register in Florida as well, and it's a separate process. And also just to clarify, so like Amandine said earlier, nexus when it comes to sales tax is not the same as nexus when you're crossing the border in terms of frequent travelers, but also nexus is it just refers to having an obligation to file and remit sales taxes. So once you have Nexus, then what you have to get is the registration. You have to register your company for sales tax with that state's taxation department.
Great. We actually had a question that touches on one of the points that you mentioned earlier, Tanita. So in Canada, I have to charge HST whether I'm selling to a reseller, like a retailer, or to the final customer. Is it the same in the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the United States, or maybe what I could start with is Canada. In Canada, the HST is charged at each point in in the value chain. You know, you have the producer and then a wholesaler and then a retailer and the consumer. Everybody is paying and collecting HST or GST, whatever the case may be, at every point in that process. In the US, it's a little bit different in the sense that there is a mechanism called a resale certificate. So for example, if you're selling your products to a retailer, that retailer may present you with a resale certificate where they're basically promising, I am not going to use these goods for myself. I'm going to resell them. And when I resell them, I'm going to charge sales tax on them. So you don't need to charge me sales tax when you sell them to me, the retailer. And so if you are selling, let's say, to a retailer or other reseller, don't be surprised if you receive that type of a certificate. That being said, if you're not registered to collect or remit sales tax, you might not have too much to do with that certificate, other than just proving that, well, I'm not registered to collect or remit sales tax anyway. But if you do have the nexus, and if you're registered for sales tax, collecting those certificates is very important, because you can then prove, well, I even though I'm registered for sales tax, I purposely didn't charge sales tax to that particular retailer because they presented me with this resale certificate. So it's a related but still a different concept to Nexus, in terms of receiving a resale certificate doesn't necessarily affect whether or not you are you have triggered Nexus and you have an obligation to register for sales tax in the US, but it's going to be something that you'll be coming up against if you're selling B2B.
Thank you, Tanita. So I'm going to trade shows in multiple states. Will I have physical nexus in all of them? It depends. The type of answer that we love to receive, it really depends on the requirements for each state. You have to look at the number of days. If it's a requirement for each given state, that employees travel triggers physical nexus, then you have to look at the number of days the employee would have to stay in that state before the nexus is triggered. And that can actually be a good tool for you when you're planning your promotional activities, and to be sure to stay within the margin, or maybe not to trigger physical nexus. That can be a very good consideration or points to include in your planning stages. And again, we keep mentioning the bibliography, but it's really a well-informed sourced bibliography, where you will find, again, a great source in Avalara. It's a very good source because it gives really practical information in a very easy, understandable, digestible way. So you will see the map, and then you just click on each state, and you will have information that has been like analyzed for any consumption for business people. So really just look at the requirements for each state and make your decisions accordingly. I think that's about it in terms of questions. We had one. Is there anything I can do to get informed before working with an accountant? It's something that we touched on. But Tanita, if you have any additional resources that you can share?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say in terms of using, let's say you can use MyEDC to ask your questions and answers in the Export Help Hub, like we mentioned. You can submit a question through MyEDC or to your relationship manager. You can use the Avalara tools that Amandine was mentioning. And by the way, EDC doesn't have any affiliation with Avalara. It is a company that provides paid services. We just genuinely really love using their resources because we find them the clearest and the most user-friendly out of all the resources out there on this subject. But that being said, up to the point where you're working with an accounting firm, all you're getting is the general principles. So don't use that information to replace working with an accounting firm to apply the general principles to your specific situation. That being said, you'll still save probably some time and and some money by being able to go to an accounting firm with that information. You're well informed, you know exactly what you're asking for, and so they'll be able to be more targeted, and you'll be using, you know, their time more wisely. And so in that sense, it's still going to be a great idea to look at those resources, but just don't use it to replace their advice, just so that you avoid any surprises.
So I think we should go to the next slide. So this is the time if you have any other questions on any other topics that we touched on before the sales tax. I know sales tax can seem like a complicated or complex topic, but then again, you just need to prepare. You know, the goal is not to give you information to scare you or anything, but to be prepared to ensure that you'll be compliant before you cross the border to the US. So if there are no additional questions, we would like to thank you to have taken the time to be with us today, this morning. We hope the information that we provided was useful and is still going to be useful in the weeks and months ahead when you are planning for your business development activities in the US. We will be sending you the presentation deck with all the additional resources. And please remember through your My EDC account, you can ask additional questions. You can consult the huge portfolio of questions and answers that we have created through the years. But you can also ask any particular questions that you don't find on the website. And thank you, Tanita. It was a pleasure delivering this presentation with you.
Thank you, Amandine, and thanks to everybody who logged on this morning. Wishing you, if you're on EST, wishing you a great lunch, and if you're in another time zone, wishing you a great rest of your day.